Hello, third grade, and welcome to Chapter 4 of Social Studies. The title of this chapter is Communities Change Over Time. Now, for this chapter, you're going to have a project that you're going to do at the end of it. So instead of working with a small group, you guys are going to be doing this as an individual project. Each one of you will do your own. You're going to do a community timeline. So you're going to choose a community that you want to research. It can be your town, your city, your country, or a state. You're going to research the history of that community. You're going to identify key events that affected the growth of your community and the places where those events happened. Write a description of each event and place. Tell why it helped your community grow. Find images and pictures to use with each one of your descriptions, and then create an illustrated timeline with your descriptions, images, and images showing these events in order as they occurred. So let's go ahead and get started. In this chapter, we're going to explore how and why communities grow, and you're going to discover how people have settled and changed their communities. You'll also read about what makes these communities special. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through our vocabulary and fill it in as you read through the chapter. You're going to come across the meaning of these words. We have the word boycott, decade, drought, expedition, innovation, monument, peninsula, public service, strait, and taxes. Check off if you know it, if you've heard it, or if you don't know it. Once you've completed that, we're going to jump in and take a look at lesson 1. How did conflict and cooperation shape early communities? In this lesson, you're going to use your investigative skills to find out how European settlers lived with natives. Reading and talking about how the Americans were settled will help you understand how conflict and cooperation shape communities over time. Here we have a painting or an illustration of explorers in North America. Now let's go ahead and begin with the information in our blue bars. We're going to read the first paragraph, look what do you think the text will be about. Then we're going to read the full article, circle any of the words that you come across that you don't know, underline what the American settlers and the government expected of Native Americans. For number 2, how did the American settlers and government treat Native Americans? What information from the text supports your ideas? And then look at the photographs. How do they help you understand how the lives of Native Americans have changed? A clash of cultures. Native Americans were the first people to live in what is now the United States. They had lived in the area for thousands of years. They had their own beliefs and ways of life. European settlers who came to North America brought their cultures with them. Often these cultures and ways of life were very different from how natives lived. Many settlers felt their cultures were the only way of life. They thought it would help the Native Americans to live as they did. They expected them to speak and dress like they did. They expected them to change their religions and give up their way of life. Native Americans lost much of their culture during this time. Native Americans had their own cultures and way of life. The Potawatomi people gathered for a special occasion in 1906. In the 1800s, states were added to the United States, from Ohio to California. American settlers moved into those regions. They took the best land for themselves. They made the Native Americans move from their homelands. The United States government made the Native Americans live on small reservations. One of these Native American groups was the Potawatomi. They lived in what is now Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. When European settlers started to arrive in the area, the Potawatomi moved west to Wisconsin. The government made treaties or agreements for the Native Americans to give up their land in return for payments. The Treaty of Fort Wayne in 1803 and 1809 particularly affected the Potawatomi. They were pushed to Kansas and then Oklahoma. As the Potawatomi moved west, they adapted to their new homeland. They learned from other plains groups how to hunt bison. All right, let's take a look at our first graphic organizer. Now here we're going to focus on what we call chronology. Chronology is looking at the order that things happened in history. So what happened first, next, last. Whenever we're talking about things like in chronological order, we're talking about them in time order, so that in order of the time that they happened. So to help you understand how historical events are connected, you're going to read the text all the way through, look at the section titles to see how the text is organized, watch for specific dates and details that tell you when things are happening, and then find key facts and important information about different events. So the time period that they gave us here in our graphic organizer was the 1800s. Going back to the text that we just read, we know that in the 1800s, many states were added to the United States. And during this, Native Americans were pushed out of their homelands and onto small reservations. Next, we're going to go in and read page 144 to 153 in our textbook. And we're going to look at different time periods. So you can see in our graphic organizer here, we have the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. And we're going to write down some key facts about things that happened in those different time periods. So let's go ahead and jump into our textbook and continue reading. Explorers arrive in the Americas. Now remember to pay attention for these different time periods, these different years, because we're going to use that information to help us fill in our graphic organizer. Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain to find a way to travel to Asia across the Atlantic Ocean. Columbus did not find a way to Asia, but he did reach the islands in the Caribbean Sea. As time went by, the Spanish explorers explored the continent of South America. By the mid-1500s, they began to explore North America. Native people lived in North America for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. They lived in both cooperation and conflict. The arrival of the European settlers would bring more conflict than cooperation. So this is one of the things we can list in the 1500s section of our graphic organizer. The European explorers came and explored the Americas, and that with them came a lot of problems. So we're going to read and see what some of the issues that came up during the 1500s are. Many early explorers of the Americas came from Spain. Explorers like Christopher Columbus wanted to find trade routes to Asia. Instead, they found North and South America. They brought back to their homelands new products like sweet corn and coconuts. They called the native people Indians because they thought they had been sailing the Indian Ocean. The Spanish continued to explore the Americas. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon explored the coast of Florida. That same year, Vasco Núñez de Balboa discovered the Pacific Ocean. Later, explorers found gold and silver in the Americas. The Spanish sent expeditions to take control of the land and the resources. An expedition is a journey for a specific purpose. In 1519, Hernán Cortés led an army to Mexico. They captured the gold and silver mines from the Aztec Empire. In 1529, Francisco Pizarro led an expedition to Peru. The Spanish took control of Inca silver mines. These expeditions made Spain very wealthy and powerful, but they were often harmful to native people. During the exploration, the Spanish met several Native American groups. Sometimes the Native Americans traded goods with the Spanish. Sometimes they helped the Spanish repair their ships. At first, very little changed for the native people because of these explorers. However, their lives began to change during the 1700s when the Spanish began building settlements in what is now the United States. Often the Native Americans and the Spanish fought. The Native Americans did not want the strangers taking over their land. About 50 years after discovering the Americas, the Spanish settled in New Mexico. Artifacts they left behind show the Spanish were and what they did. A Spanish cart from 1845 was discovered in the sand dunes of a ranch in Las Cruces, New Mexico. The Spanish settlers used the cart to transport goods along the El Camino Real, Spanish for the Royal Road. El Camino Real was a major travel route. So for our 1500s, we can write that Europeans explored the Americas. They took land and pushed a lot of the Native Americans out of their areas. Spain was not the only country to explore the New World. Great Britain, France, Portugal, and other countries sent expeditions across the Atlantic Ocean. At first, they searched for a route to Asia. Later, they focused on finding riches in the new land. America is named after the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci. He explored Brazil and other parts of South America for Spain. The Pacific Ocean was named by Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan. In 1520, he was the first explorer to cross the Pacific Ocean. English explorers looked for a northern route to Asia. In 1497, Italian explorer John Cabot explored the coast of Canada for England. In 1610, Henry Hudson sailed what is now the Hudson Bay. Later, England created the Hudson's Bay Company to sell fur. Robert Cavelier de la Salle. Robert Cavelier de la Salle was born in France in 1643. He moved to Canada in search of fortune. While trading furs, he heard about the land to the west. La Salle learned from the Native Americans how to survive on the land. He eventually canoed the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, claiming the area for France. He also tried to expand France's land by attacking the Spanish in part of Mexico, but failed. On a later expedition, he was killed by his men. Explorers settle in North America. By the 1600s, European settlers began living in North America. They built homes, farms, businesses, and forts. Some of the first permanent settlers were Spanish missions, or some of the first permanent settlements were Spanish missions. There, priests like Father Junipero Serra in California worked to spread Christianity. The Spanish taught Native Americans about Christianity, European farming, cattle raising, and European ways of living. Sometimes they forced Native Americans to change religions, give up their land, or work in the mission. European countries fought with one another over land claims. Settlers also fought with Native Americans over land, resources, and ways of life. Conflict between the two groups of the land often led to stolen cattle, burned crops, and battles. The European had more effective weapons than the Native Americans. They also brought diseases like smallpox with them from Europe. These had a devastating impact on Native people. Europeans found goods that they had never seen, such as corn and potatoes. They also brought goods that were new to America. Settlers traded with Europe and with the native peoples. Europeans brought horses to America. Native Americans could now hunt more effectively and move from place to place much faster. Settlers also brought goods like guns, metal cookware, tools, and cloth. Many Native Americans used European goods for everyday life. So for the 1600s section of our graphic organizer, we can put in there that Europeans explored Canada and the inner part of the United States, and that settlers began to live in the United States. And one of the first settlements that we had were missions. So here we can take a look at our picture. We can see some of the crops that were sent back from what they called the New World back to Europe, and what came from Europe to the Americas. I'll zoom in here so that you can read them more easily. So what they took back to Europe included tobacco, pumpkin, turkey, pineapple, squash, corn, beans, tomatoes, potatoes, sweet potatoes, cassava, avocado, quinine, cocoa beans, vanilla, and peppers. Some of the things they brought from Europe included sugarcane, grapes, turnips, honeybees, peach, pears, coffee beans, onions, bananas, olives, barley, wheat, rice, oats, horses, sheep, cattle, and pigs were things that they brought over. Impact of American settlers. American goods were very valuable to Europeans and American settlers. People wanted animal furs and tobacco. They also found that sugarcane grew much better in tropical areas of the Americas than in Europe. The trade of furs, sugar, and tobacco led to the growth of European settlements and communities. It also led to conflict that had negative effects on many communities. Forests were cut down to make room for farms. Settlers in the Americas needed workers to build houses and farms. Indentured servants would work for several years in exchange for passage to the Americas. As communities expanded, however, European colonies began enslaving Native American and African people. They also claimed more land inhabited by Native Americans. Primary source in their words, Chief Joseph. We gave up some of our country to the white men, thinking that we could have peace. We were mistaken. Oklahoma tribal jurisdiction areas. Conflicts over land would continue. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. It forced Native Americans from their homes. It set up an Indian colonization zone, which included what is now Iowa, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Native people were forced to march thousands of miles. Without enough food or supplies, many did not survive the journey. It became known as the Trail of Tears. The United States promised this territory would always belong to the Native Americans, but it didn't keep that promise. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state, taking more territory for the United States. Today, Native Americans still have territory and the right to govern themselves. So they definitely don't have as much land as they used to have because a lot of those lands were stolen from them. They do still have some reservations, but those are small areas they were forced onto that were not made of, they didn't have fertile soil, they didn't have a lot of the resources because the settlers kept all of those lands for themselves. So for the 1700s, we can list in our graphic organizer that settlers and Native Americans fought as Europeans and Americans took over more and more land. And then for the 1800s, we can list over here in the 1830s, the Indian Removal Act of 1839 forced Native Americans onto different reservations. So that'll take you through the entirety of this graphic organizer. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at our writing section. So where it says write and cite evidence, in your opinion, what are some positive things that happen when different cultures meet? And what are some negative things? So what are some good things that happen when you have different cultures come and mix together? And what are some bad things? And then for your connect to the essential question, it says think about the people and events you read and talked about in this lesson. How did they change things for the United States? So you can talk about how Native Americans lived, the influence and the effect that the settlers had on life, and not just where they're living, but how they were living, their cultures, their religions, their general way of life. All of that information you can list there. Make sure you use complete sentences and very neat handwriting. If you have any questions, let me know. That takes us to the end of lesson 1, and I will see you guys next time. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, take care. Bye-bye.